All right, well, welcome. We're trickling in, as is our style. Well, as we continue on in our presentation about trying to understand modernism and the effects that were going on in the last quarter of the 19th century and into the 20th century, and this change with modernism and the reaction to it, which we might label fundamentalism. We're trying to understand those things and those components because it would deeply affect what goes on and continues to today. And I think we've seen that a lot of the things and concerns that they were dealing with, it's like it's happening right now. It's like they could have written some of this right now. And so some of the things that we were identifying that was part of the fundamentalism was going to be that premillennial type view, which was something new. And we talked extensively about that. We also said another concern was what was called the holiness movement, and that was about Christian piety and how one lived being very significant and important. There had much had gotten away from that, and so that emphasis on that was going to be another characteristic. But then then we also talked about the doctrine and the inspiration, if you will, of the scriptures, and how while that had been understood for centuries, if you will, with this questioning, some would say attack, or however you want to view that was going on, and challenging the very fundamentals of what that meant and the understanding of that. There were those at Princeton and other places that tried to formalize or codify, get a more solid understanding of what that was, and B.B. Warfield and some others were involved with that. And so that understanding, as we would more understand it today, the particulars and all the parts of that, it's wrong to say it had its origins, but it became more solidified and clarified, at least in some of that understanding. But then there was also these other things. And so our story of fundamentalism, as far as its effect and these things coming together, because remember, we had Charles Darwin and the Origin of the Species, and that was 1859? 59 is when that came out. And that had a lot of implications. And people used it different ways. It was even more than just asking or questioning, or at least some turned it into questioning. And again, there's a lot of debate on that, on what he intended and what others took and did with it to justify things. But it's clearly questioning things as we understood them and had for centuries in the Bible, but also things such as race and so on and so forth, that his studies were being used in that way, whether he intended that or not. And so our story begins just after the Civil War. And remember, any time that there is such a massive cataclysmic event, it disrupts. There's resets. There's changes that take place. And the Civil War here was certainly one of those. And so when evangelical Protestantism was still the dominant force in American life, while there are already signs of the impending demise of the unofficial religious establishment, confidence and unity prevailed. By the end of the 1870s, the beginnings of a major schism were apparent. And so here's where we're going to start seeing that, for want of a better phraseology, that science and the Bible conflict really starting to begin to take root. And so the split was typified by a schism, by the diverging paths, in this case, of two friends and associates in pre-Civil War reforms, including the abolitionist movement. Henry Ward Beecher, and Jonathan Blanchard. Now, we've probably heard maybe of Henry Ward Beecher. He was maybe the most famous preacher in America at the time. Now remember, he lives up east, okay? His dad was Lyman Beecher, and his sister was Harriet Stowe Beecher, who was, of course, extremely famous for writing a certain book called Her Uncle Tom's Cabin, that historians have credited with bringing about the Civil War for the abolition of slavery. That it was huge, the effect of that book. But anyhow, and so these two were abolitionists, and they were Congregationalists. They were of that stripe, and so they were friends. And what ended up happening as this time went on is that Beecher championed modernism and Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. He bought into the things that was being said. Now remember, whenever we talk about this, we should never, we always talk about these, major understandings and so on and so forth. Remember, there's a spectrum. Not everybody takes it as far or buys in every aspect, and that's true of anything. And so I think it's important to say that as we discuss this. And stating that, and Beecher championed modernism, theory of evolution, stating that it was not incompatible with Christian beliefs. And as we go on in this, we're going to look in detail, not just at what he said, but that understanding. While Blanchard was more in line of what would later be considered fundamentalist doctrine. Okay, kind of that reaction. So here they are, two good buddies, and this was going to create some issues. Also what was going on, and we've probably heard of Dwight Moody, and up in Chicago was the Bible Institute. It's now called the Moody Bible Institute. And he was a very, not only famous, but very successful revivalist preacher in the 19th, into the 19th and into the 20th century. And it was huge. It was huge. Now, he didn't necessarily buy into all the premillennial stuff and all that, but as often happens, when there's common goals or points, sometimes that brings together, they said, make strange bedfellows, maybe that phrase. And so we see some of that goes on. But he did a lot of work and was very successful not only here, but also over in Britain. Involved with the YMCA and many things like that. If you read about his things, most of us today, because we're so far removed, I heard that name, but we don't realize the impact these people had. Before World War I, the emerging fundamentalist coalition was largely quiescent or lay dormant. In other words, all these things were there, but they hadn't come out and manifested like they were going to. Few could have predicted the explosion that followed. The war intensified hopes and fears, totally upset existing balances in American culture. It brought out an aggressive and idealistic theological modernism. It also revealed that the reaction against evangelicalism, which had been proceeding quietly for half a century, was far more general and widespread than had been thought. Moreover, the war raised the question of the survival of civilization and morality. In other words, after the war, these big questions started happening. These things that were percolating for a while came to a greater fruition. And so they didn't just happen because the war ended, per se. And interesting, upsetting the existing balances in American culture. In other words, the way things were done and always have been done. So these cataclysmic events, and we've had many in our history, as have other countries. And so important to realize that. In the post-war atmosphere of alarm, fundamentalism emerged as a distinct phenomenon. Hey, Heidi, could you flip two of those switches? Just to dim it a little bit. Yes, thank you. I wanted you to see a little bit of that. This is, in this cartoon here, it says science, family, like on his leg. So this is the Pied Piper leading people away in this political cartoon. And so to that cave of disbelief in God. So this is the thinking that's going on, of which, many of us feel that way about a lot of things. And so, moving on two fronts, they fought against the onslaughts of liberalism within the major denominations, while others campaigned to ban the teaching of Darwinism in American schools. The ridicule heaped upon William Jennings Bryan at the Scopes trial in Tennessee in 1925 and his subsequent death marked a turning point for the fundamentalist movement, quickly losing its position as a nationally influential coalition. So you see, after the war, it percolates up, became very potent, and then because of what happened at the Scopes trial and different things, it kind of lost a lot of its steam. Didn't go away, but lost a lot of its steam, and then kind of reemerged kind of later as far as this broad cultural phenomenon understanding. To further understand and appreciate this conflict, I want to present this conflict between modernism and fundamentalism in the words of two men that were on opposite sides of the religious debate. And these books that we're going to be looking at are in your bibliography, if you choose to read them. But anyhow, J. Gresham, did we say Machen? Macon? Machen, sorry, thank you. And he was the professor of the New Testament at Princeton. Now, Princeton's a Presbyterian school. Okay, now we tend to think of all these schools as being, bastions of liberalism and things like that, certainly now. But certainly in those days, they were kind of the more conservative one, and Harvard and Yale were kind of already going their directions. And he authored this book called Christianity and Liberalism in 1923, where he's putting down all these thoughts and arguments and the things of what he perceives is going on. And in my readings, that book was labeled the 100 most influential books of the 20th century by whoever determines those things. And meaning it had impact in what he was expressing. And it was based on a lecture he delivered at Princeton 2 years earlier. And in the book, Machen compared conservative Protestantism to the rising popularity of modernist or liberal theology. And so he's drawing this conflict. They're seeing these differences at that time. And he concluded that the chief modern rival of Christianity was liberalism. Not atheism, not this, not that, but liberalism. And he was the one that kind of led the revolt, if you will, in Protestant Christian circles, if you will, at Princeton. And he later left Princeton and formed Westminster Theological Seminary as a more orthodox alternative. Okay, so this is a guy involved in these battles and in these wars. So he's an academic, but he's looking at these broad things. The other guy, so he's the conservative in the debate. Then there's Shaler Matthews. Now, he was an American liberal Christian theologian involved with the social gospel movement, and we've heard of that, and we're going to look at more detail at that. And he presented the pro-modernist position in Christianity. Matthews was the dean of the Divinity School at the University of Chicago, and he wrote a number of books in the affirmative of modernism and its application to Christianity. Two such books are in your bibliography. The Faith of Modernism, which he wrote in response to Machen's book, and The Individual and the Social Gospel, which he wrote a number of years earlier. And we're going to look into this to see what they meant, because in our fellowship, being a more conservative way of viewing at things, as you look at the spectrum, social gospel was a dirty word, dirty description. It It wasn't thought of it well, and there was reasons that they had for that, but that was looked at as a negative. But he was an infirmary, so we want to look at that. And so what I want to do is I want to present some of what each of them were saying, rather than someone presenting what someone else said that they said. Let's look and see what they said. In his introduction to Christianity and liberalism, Machen acknowledges that the present world has undergone tremendous change in the past 100 years. The understandings of the past have been under attack. Now, look when he's writing this. Past 100 years was 1825 to 1925. Okay, well, we're 100 years past that.
Civil War and First World War.
Well, yes, he's had that, for sure. And so, yeah, so those two major conflicts. And so we're 100 years past him writing this. So just a little perspective. Now remember, this guy's an academic, so I'm going to try to interpret some of this because the way they write. No department of knowledge can maintain its isolation from the modern lust of scientific conquest. Treaties of inviolability, sacredness, though hallowed by all the sanctions of age-long traditions, are being flung ruthlessly to the winds. Wow, that's a big fancy way of saying that there's nothing that held from the past that isn't being questioned or attacked or bombarded, if you will, with what's going on now. And so the long-established traditions and decades are just being attacked. In such an age, it is obvious that every inheritance from the past must be subject to searching criticism. And as a matter of fact, some convictions of the human race have crumbled to pieces in the test. Indeed, dependence on any institution upon the past is now sometimes even regarded as furnishing a presumption, not in favor of it, but against it. So many convictions had to be abandoned that men have sometimes come to believe all convictions must go. So what is he doing here? He is saying in his high academic language these frustrations with what is going on in modern life, in their times, this questioning of things that have long been held and established. And that in some circles, wow, if you think like that, you're just an old, whatever, and fogey, and so on and so forth. And so that's what he's saying. Kaz.
What is the change that she's talking about, like some cultural changes that I assume he's referring to? What are those things? I see he's expressing the differences, changes made, but I guess I'm not familiar with that.
Sure.
The cultural
Well,
change.
and we've tried to go over it in this general sense that the 19th century was a time of major change. All right, and so because of the time of the Enlightenment and the questioning and development of science and this trust in the scientific method and so on and so forth, there were those that began to question things about life as they understood them. And people's understandings began to change on different stuff because of that. And we're certainly a benefit of a lot of that in various things. Okay, and so, but then there was also this questioning of these understandings of faith and so on. And so this is what's going on culturally wide. And so that's what he's addressing, these broad things.
Specific.
Well, they were questioning things in the Bible. They were questioning that there was a virgin birth. They were questioning miracles. They were questioning the resurrection. They were questioning all these things in Christianity, but just about life. Scott.
Yeah. The short answer to this is that old lead, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Where's my button here? Now, the short answer to this is it all led to the incorrect conclusion that there is no such thing as absolute truth.
Yeah.
whether the scriptures or anywhere else.
So he's saying that all this question is there absolute truth that had been held, and this was a chipping away of that. And of course, we're this far removed, or on this side of even this. And we can understand that in our culture because we're living in these times. Well, that's when it was beginning, and so these frustrations with that. Now again, he's speaking broadly, but he's speaking more specifically to understanding of the Christian faith. And so his view is the modernists were chipping away at these fundamental things and foundations of belief that one would say, well, if you don't believe that, then what do you got? And so, but we're going to try to explain some of this understanding, and it gets complicated. And Scott.
And let me say along with that, there is no basis for believing anything. In fact, there is no basis for thinking about anything without belief in absolute truth.
Sure.
There is not. You can't even make a statement to the effect that there is no absolute truth without stating
An absolute truth.
an absolute.
Yeah. And Scott's bringing up a lot of the arguments that have certainly developed over time, and we're on this side of that and aren't unfamiliar with that. So bottom line, he's very frustrated that he's thinking, hey, some people are saying, well, if this is different and this is different, and we think differently about this, well, let's just almost start over. And so that's kind of the frustration. If such an attitude is justifiable, then no institution is faced by a stronger hostile presumption than the institution of the Christian religion. For no institution has based itself more squarely upon the authority of a bygone age. And so these modernists are questioning anything because of the foundations and roots of the past. And they're saying, let us give a look at it. And so he's saying that, hey, there's no institution under attack more than Christianity, because it's rooted in these understandings of the past, not the present. We are not now inquiring whether such a policy is wise or historically justifiable. In any case, the fact itself is plain that Christianity during many centuries has consistently appealed for the truth of its claims, not merely and not even primarily to current experience, but to certain ancient books. That most recent was written some 1900 years ago. Okay, so he's saying, hey, we appeal to these ancient documents as a source of faith, and not to things that are just right now, or that we can see, if you will. And so that's this big argument. This can get kind of deep. I know some of us are probably swimming in, now, but I wanted to try to touch on some of this so that it's not just some simplistic little thing.
Talking about questioning the authority of the Bible.
Well,
Or
or
repeat the question, please, or the comment.
he said, you mean the authority of the Bible? And so what I'm saying is that this the basis of this debate gets kind of deep. In the understanding. And so not that I'm expecting us to grasp all this, I certainly don't, but rather that we have this understanding of what's going on, because I think it helps us to understand where we're at today. And you know what? I think it's important to say this too, that all the questions that were asked by the modernists weren't necessarily wrong or heresy, or the fact that even things changed. Because if we look through history, and hopefully we've seen this class, things have changed a whole lot more than we want to think they have over time, and things that we accept as so, and I don't mean everything, but I'm talking about practices and stuff like that at one time were held as this, we don't necessarily even hold to. And so it's not that there isn't some truth, but of course what often happens with everything is they take it and they go way, way, way far from that, and I think that's part of what he's struggling with. It's no wonder that the appeal is being criticized today, for the writers of books in question were of no doubt men of their own age, whose outlook on the material world judged by modern standards, must have been the crudest and the most elementary kind. Inevitably, the question rises whether the opinions of such men can ever be normative for men of the present day, or in other words, whether first century religion can ever stand in the company with modern day science. And so what he's presenting is supposedly the modernist argument. And so what's being said here is that these guys are thinking, you know what, these guys were a bunch of hayseeds. They didn't know as much as we knew. We know science, we know this. We're so much smarter than they were. That's what he's pointing out and attacking. And what he sees is a real problem with the modernist view. And so, and I think he has really great points there. You know, that are we to be so full of ourselves that we think that, you know, I mean, we've all been there and can get that way. But again, it doesn't mean don't question or ask this stuff, but where do some people go with it? And so that's this debate. You got those that are holding on to say, hey, this is the truth, this is the faith, and we got those that are questioning of it, and they're saying, how many of us have heard the saying or a phrase or something, how can you trust in some Bronze Age book? Have you ever heard the Bible referred to as the Bronze Age book? Well, that is a derogatory phrase. They're saying Bronze Age. You know, what did they know? And you're saying that we should follow that? It's a similar kind of thinking, Scott.
Yeah, this was a complete misunderstanding about the nature of science and the nature of religion. And the fact is that the scientific method, which they were presumably appealing to, has nothing to say about the truth of the scriptures. Nothing whatsoever. They have to be tested historically, not with a scientific method. And moreover, the scientific method can't even prove itself. You can't prove by the scientific method that the scientific method works.
And so the scientific method is a tool that some put such complete faith in. And Scott's pointing out that's a little unwarranted. But it's a tool which one can learn to come about, you know, understanding some particulars and facts and things, and so it's useful. And we've benefited greatly from it on this side of it, for sure. And so it's not that that's bad. So when we often talk in the debates between religion and science bad, religion good. Well, yeah. And of course, you've maybe heard the term scientism. That is a phrase that developed to describe those who put their total faith and trust in science and almost make that their religion, if not making it. And so that's why they say, well, I can't see God, so he mustn't exist. Because science I'm supposed to be able to observe. And yet a lot of times conclusions are such that they're not observing them either. They're just putting their own biases and their own things in there, as can happen the other way. And so, again, this is what's going on. And so the modernists, you know, were saying, can anything be normative from back then? And so this great conflict's going on. If science is so effectively dismantling Christianity in the modern age, Machen then asked, what is the relation between Christianity and the modern culture? May Christianity be maintained in a scientific age? So he's saying, if those things are true, what you modernists are saying, can there even be Christianity in this age? And so again, we see this great thing going on. He continues, is this the problem which liberalism attempts to solve? Admitting that scientific objections may arise against the particularities of the Christian religion, against the Christian doctrines of the person of Christ, and the redemption through his death and resurrection. The liberal theologian seeks to rescue certain of the general principles of religion, of which these particularities are thought to be merely symbols. and the general principles he regards as constituting the essence of Christianity. Okay, that may seem really confusing because it's written in that highbrow stuff, but what he's saying is this. He's saying now remember, the liberal theologian is not an atheist. He has faith in Christ also. Now, there would be those that might disagree on how that's, in the particulars manifest, but he's not denying Christ. He's saying, how do we update this for our modern way of understanding? Because look what science has done and shown us. And so what he's saying is the liberal theologian thinks that they're rescuing Christianity and making it valid to today. It was 100 years ago, but valid to today. And so what are the principles? What's the essence of Christianity? And that it's really not these details. So, we should have Christianity even if Jesus really didn't get resurrected. And even if there really wasn't a virgin birth. And so those, on the other hand, would say, wait, that's the whole basis of our faith. And without this, as Shane keeps showing every sermon we have for the past year, seeing the empty tomb, if that's not so, then what is it? And so that's what's going on. Scott.
Yeah, and equally importantly, if those are not true, then what's the point?
Yeah. What's the point? What are we doing? Then we've all seen the billboards that the atheists put up. Be good for goodness sake. Well, if you just be good for goodness sake. Why? Is exactly it. Why? Why should I be good if there's no reason to be good? Well, you see, this gets really deep and complicated. Yes, Joe?
Two things. Without a creator, and I mentioned this before, creating a world that has so much that you can study and have a scientific method with, and a God who loves us. I don't see anything worth anything. The Christian life is still the best life
Sure.
that anybody can live.
And I think we all in here are having trouble relating to what they're saying, because that's not where we're coming from. But it's important that we understand where they're coming from, just to know. Scott.
When I first realized where they were coming from, I was deeply depressed and stage told for about 5 years. Because if you buy into this, it completely sweeps away your foundation for believing anything.
Yeah. So you get nihilism, right? There's nothing. And of course, you look in the 20th century. A couple world wars had something to do with that, seeing everything blown up. But you're right, and so these are deep things, and things that we have to deal with today. And so it's good if we understand it. So basically, what's happening is that the liberalism, in Machen's view, is gutting Christianity of any substance and just sticking up some scarecrow, if you will, without any substance to it. That's basically what he's saying. And so Machen then points out the weaknesses with this conclusion arrived at by the liberal and the critique fostered from it. So remember, the liberals thinking, I'm rescuing Christianity by making it acceptable to people today who have seen that science and these old, ways of understanding, this really aren't quite right. And so, two lines of criticism then are possible with respect to the liberal attempt at reconciling science and Christianity. Modern liberalism may be criticized on the ground that it is unchristian. That's what Machen's saying. He said liberalism, that's not just, no, it's unchristian. On the ground that it is unscientific, and on the ground that it's unscientific. So he's saying it's neither of the claims that they're making, is what his point is. You're saying you're still Christian, and you're basing this on science, and I'm going to make the arguments, and you got to read his book to get all this. I can't do this all up here. That you're neither. We shall then concern ourselves here chiefly with the former line of criticism. We shall be interested in showing that despite the liberal use of traditional phraseology, modern liberalism not only is a different religion from Christianity, but belongs in a totally different class of religions. So he's really going for it here, as far as saying none of what you say, Scott.
Yeah, very quickly, what Machen's saying there, in essence, is let's apply scientific or scientism to liberalism and see how far it goes.
Yeah. You know, a lot of times we take a little concept that seems to make sense and we apply it to something without thinking it through, if you want to put it that way. And you know what? That isn't true just with liberal. It happens on our side too. You know, and so, but just mean that process or that way of doing it. But nonetheless, we got 5 minutes. But in showing that the liberal attempt at rescuing Christianity is false, we are not showing that the liberal attempt is false. We're not showing that there is no way of rescuing Christianity at all. On the contrary, it may appear incidentally, even in this present little book, Christianity and Liberalism, that it is not the Christianity of the New Testament, which is in conflict with science, but the supposed Christianity of the modern liberal church, and that the real city of God and the city alone as defenses which are capable of warding off the insults of modern unbelief. So he's taken this on. He says the problem isn't with science, as Scott has pointed out many times. The problem is with what you're all pushing and the conclusions you're coming to and where you're going with it is what the problem is. And again, I think some of the things and questions and things that they've discovered and looking and relooking at understandings, I think there's some validity in some of that. But of course, when you start going and saying there's no resurrection, you know, Jesus was swooning in there. He couldn't have really died. He had to have been, all that. And we're not unfamiliar with this, those that have looked into those things, those arguments. And they don't seem to make any sense because they don't. Did you have something else, Scott?
Well, simply to say that there is no way to account for the resurrection.
Yeah.
Unless it actually occurred in space and time, that is to say it was historical.
Yes.
There's no way to account for it.
Correct. Yeah, he's saying there's no way to account for the resurrection. Again, those of us that have looked into those things, and there's a lot of information out there on it, and some of the explanations they've tried to come to meet up with their belief that there can be no miracles and none of that. They try to come up with these crazy explanations on some of the, at least I think they're crazy, and probably you do too. And so here is another cartoon from the Times that's showing this descent of the modernists. You know, Bible's not infallible, not made in God's image, no miracles, no virgin birth, no deity, no atonement, no resurrection, Gnosticism leading to atheism. And so that's a cartoon illustrating the argument from certainly from Machen's point of view. And of course we would understand this. We get what he's saying here in this particular thing. Okay, that's a good place to stop, and then we will next class. We're gonna let Shaler Matthews, who's presenting the liberal point of view, we're gonna let him present it in his own words, because we want to understand what are you trying to say, and it'll be very interesting. because this is at the heart of all this and the heart of what we deal with today. These clashing approaches and worldviews and understandings that are going on. So I hope we aren't so totally, thoroughly confused, Linda.
You know I am.
Yeah, it's complicated stuff, but thank you very much.
No,